This is the 5th video for Chapter 2. This is Lesson 5, Percent of Change. We're going to start with some vocab. So, first, our vocab word is percent of change. Percent of change is a ratio that compares the amount of change to the original amount. So the best way I can describe percent of change is if you know there was an original amount, let's say that your favorite candy bar used to weigh 1 ounce, and now they've decided to make that a bigger, better, more wonderful candy bar that now weighs 1.5 ounces. You can figure out the percent that candy bar changed from its original weight. It's not just taking and subtracting and saying, oh, now it's 0.5 of an ounce more. It's actually figuring out what percent of the original that it got bigger. Okay? So, the formula for this is the change amount. We call that delta. Remember, delta represents change for us. It also represents subtraction because that tells us how to find change. And then we're going to put that over the original amount. So in the case of our candy bars, we would subtract these two to figure out how much it changed. That would go on top. The original weight of the candy bar would go on the bottom. And then we would do some division and some D2Ping to change that to a percent. It's not very hard. Let's see one together. You're going to skip a little bit ahead in your notes to question number 1 in your practice problems. So in your practice problems, it says, in 2010, gas prices averaged around $3.20 per gallon. This was our original amount. This was how much it cost in 2010, so several years ago. Last week, the average gas price was $2.40 per gallon. So original amount was $3.20. Our new amount was $2.40. And we are trying to figure out the percent of change. So what percent did our gas prices change from 2010 until now? So begin this problem by writing down your formula, delta over the original. I'm going to answer the question already. Yes, I do expect to see you write this formula down every single time. The more you write it down, the more you will remember it. So remember, delta represents change. Delta represents that difference between the original and the new. So we have to do a little bit of subtraction here. $3.20 minus $2.40. That will tell me how much our gas prices changed since 2010. 0 minus 0 is 0. 2 minus 4, I'm going to have to do some borrowing. I'm going to borrow. I get 12 minus 4 is 8. Line up your decimal. 2 minus 2 is 0. So our gas prices changed. They had a delta or a change of 80 cents in those years since 2010. And then we divide that 80-cent change by the original amount. So the original amount was $3.20. So this is the first stage of solving my problem. I write it as a ratio. Now remember, we do want to change it to percent form. So we're going to divide $3.20 by 80 cents because we want to change it to a decimal, and then we'll use D2P to change it to a percent. So it's not okay to have a decimal outside the house. I'm going to move my decimal 2 places. I'll balance that out by moving it 2 places inside the house as well. So my new problem looks like this. 80 divided by 320. 320 does not go into 80, but it does go into 800 twice. 2 times 320 is 640. If I do that subtraction, I get 160. 160 is smaller than 320, so I can add a 0, bring it down, and I get 1,600. 320 goes into 1,600 5 times. If you don't believe me, check my math. 5 times 320 is exactly 1,600. So My decimal in this problem is 0.25 or 25 hundredths. I want to change it to a percent, so I'm going to use D2P. I'm going to move my decimal 2 places to the right, 1, 2, and that tells me that I have a 25% change. But the last thing I want to do is I want to include if this is an increase or a decrease. That's how we finish up our percent of change problems. So to figure out if it's an increase or a decrease, we figure out if the original got smaller or if it got bigger. So our original was $3.20. Our new gas price is $2.40. That tells me that my gas price went down over those years. So this is a 25% decrease. Please remember to write that word at the end just to tell us, hey, did it go up or did it go down? So this tells me that gas prices decreased by 25%. And what that means is if we took 25% of $3.20 and we decreased the gas by that amount, it would equal $2.40. So that's percent of change. Not super hard, as long as you remember to use your formula. The other piece of this lesson is percent error. So please go back to the first page in your 2.5 notes. Percent error, this deals with when we do some guessing. So it is a ratio that compares the amount of error to the original number, or the actual number. That might even be a better word to use here. Actual number, the correct number. So imagine that you were guessing on something. You thought that you could read 8 pages in 10 minutes. So you go ahead and you carry out your reading and you find that you can actually read 10 pages in 10 minutes. So your guess was 8, but the actual number was 10. So percent error figures out, hey, how far away was your guess in terms of the actual number, the correct number? So the formula is delta, which is the amount of error, and that is another subtraction problem. We're going to subtract these two numbers, 10 minus 8, and that tells us the amount of error. I was off by 2. And then we would divide that by the actual amount. We would divide it by the actual amount, which would be 10, and do some math and turn that into a percent as well. And that tells us what percent of my correct answer was I actually off by. All right, so that's just a real quick rundown. Let's see one problem in action. This is number 4 from your notes. Now we're talking about our friend Michael here. While Michael was hunting, he saw a 10-point buck. He estimated, so he guessed, his distance from the buck to be 45 yards. That's the guess. Later, Michael measured the actual distance and found that he was 50 yards from the buck. So 50 yards was his actual distance. What is his percent of error? So I do want you to write down the formula. The formula is delta over actual. Delta means the change or the difference. So we're going to take our actual and our guess and we are going to subtract them. 50 minus 45. You can do this in your head if you want. That's fine by me. 50 minus 45 is 5. So the amount of error, the amount off that his guess was, is 5. And then we divide it by the actual distance, the actual number, and that's 50. So my first step here is my ratio, 5 over 50. And we want to turn that into a percent. So we drop the 5 into the house and we do some division. 50 does not go into 5, but it does go into 50 one time. 1 times 50 is 50. This is a much easier math problem than the last one. So I've got my decimal here, 1/10. Remember, we are going to use D2P to change that into a percent. Move our decimal 2 places to the right and add a 0. So our final percent answer is 10%. This time we don't have to worry about using the words increase or decrease. We just have to follow it with the word error. So Michael measured the actual distance. His actual distance was 50 yards. That means he was 10% of this amount off in his guess. That means it's a pretty good guess. 10% is a pretty small margin of error. The bigger the number you see right here, the less accurate your guess was. So a 10% error means we could take 10% of 50 and we could figure out if it was 10% above or 10% below, and that could be used to find our 45 yards in the guess. Okay, so this is my final answer right here, 10% error. Remember, I do want to see these formulas written down in your problems. The more we write down the formula, the more we remember them. So here's what you have to do to finish up this lesson. We did skip your 2.5 notes questions 1 and 2. I want you to go back to those questions and answer them. Look at the formulas, look at the examples, and see how are they alike, how are they different, because these two things are very similar, but they also solve for two different things. After that, you're going to finish your 2.5 practice problems. There are not many of them. Make your new flashcards for percent of change and percent error. And when you're finished, we do have another quiz coming up, Chapter 2, Quiz 3. And after that, you can move on and begin 2.6.